This is part 4 of my 1.3 cardiovascular system assignment. So basically this table here shows you the structural differences between all 5 blood vessels. So for example, from the table we can see that an artery has a smaller diameter than a vein, but has a much larger wall thickness than a vein, as it has 1 millimeter, whereas this has 0.5 of a millimeter in thickness, and this is also to do with the different roles that each vessel has. So for example, the arteries carry the oxygenated blood away from the heart, whereas the veins transport the deoxygenated blood towards the heart. And the arteries have a relatively narrow lumen as well, and have more smooth and elastic tissue, as you can see shown in this table here, than the veins do. And the veins have a much larger lumen as well, and much less smooth and elastic tissue. This is due to them having to transport blood under a lower pressure than the arteries. And the capillary is an 8 micrometers in diameter and a 0.5 of a micrometer in thickness of a micrometer, and this means that they are only 1 cell thick. And this also helps with gas exchange. And also, if you notice here, they all have an endothelium layer, which is all made up of endothelial tissue, and this helps to create less friction between the blood. So here we just have an overview of each blood vessel. So here we talk about the arteries and their structure and their function. So the structure of the arteries is that they have a thick muscular elastic layer, and this expands as the blood surges through them and recoils after. And they are controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, and their function is to deliver the blood under high pressure and high velocity as it has been injected from the heart, and it also carries the blood away from the heart. So because of the high pressure that is exerted of these arteries, they have a thick wall of smooth tissue that is covered by a tough outer layer of fibrous connective tissue. Arteries also have layers of elastic fibres that control the diameter of the artery. These elastic tissues allow it to stretch and recoil. So where the veins do not have much connective tissue containing collagen fibres, this elastic tissue allows the arteries to have flexibility, and the elastic fibres also provide the artery with the firmness and the strength. This also helps with the high pressure generated by the heart. Then we talk about the arterioles. So the arterioles transport the blood from the arteries to the capillaries, and they're the main regulators of the blood flow and pressure. And the structure of them is that they have tiny branches of arteries that lead to the capillaries. They're also made up of smooth muscular tissue, and they are under the control of the sympathetic nervous system. They also constrict and dilate to regulate the blood flow. So arterioles have muscular walls, and they are the primary site of the vascular resistance, which reduces the pressure and the velocity of the flow for gas and nutrients exchange, so to occur within the capillaries. Arterioles are also innervated and can also respond to other circulating factors that regulate the caliber. So arterioles have muscular walls that consist of 1 or 2 layers of smooth muscle. They're also the primary site of the vascular resistance, so this reduces the pressure and velocity of the blood flow and enables gas and nutrients exchange to occur within the capillaries. Arterioles are also innervated and also responsible for the various circulating hormones and other factors such as a pH, in order to regulate the caliber and the modulating the amount of blood flow into the capillary and the network, as well as the tissues. So the arterioles have the tiny branches that lead to the capillaries, and this is also under the control of the sympathetic nervous system, and they constrict and dilate to regulate this blood flow. And vasoconstriction also takes place. This is when the increased contraction of circular smooth muscle in their arteriolar wall, which leads to the increased resistance and decreased flow through the vessels. The arterioles vasoconstrict to minimize the flow to the capillary bed, and vasodilation is the decreased contraction of circular and smooth muscle in the arterial wall, which leads to the decreased resistance and increased flow through the vessels. So they also vasodilate to increase the blood flow. This is also known as autoregulation. Now we move on to the capillaries. And so their structure is that they are tiny and narrow. They're also in networks of capillaries. They are supplied with blood by the arterioles and then drained by the venules. They're also one cell thick, and their function is to supply the tissues with the components of blood. They remove the waste from the surrounding cells, and they also are where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide happens. So the capillaries are also the smallest blood vessels, and their walls are only one cell thick, which allows the diffusion between the blood and the cells to occur. The nutrients and the oxygen from the blood diffuses through the capillary walls into the tissue that needs it. This is aided by relatively high pressure and also squeezes the oxygen and nutrients through the capillary wall and into the cell's tissue. The small diameter of the capillaries slow the flow of the blood. This also increases the rate of diffusion. Also, the thin walls provide short diffusion distance, and the surface area of one capillary is very, very small, and they're all only one cell thick. But there are things called capillary beds, which are thousands of them that make up the interconnected network. This means that they have a large surface area when they're all together, which gives them more opportunity for gas exchange to take place due to the larger surface area. Then we can talk about the precapillary sphincters. So a precapillary sphincter is a sphincter of smooth muscle tissue which is located at an arterial end of a capillary and serving to control the flow of the blood to the tissues. So as the blood flows through the human body, it moves through the branch system of the arteries to the capillaries, where it delivers the oxygen and the nutrients while picking up the waste. So the precapillary sphincters reduce the blood flow to the inactive tissues and allow free flow to the active tissues. So the mechanism allows the blood flow to increase the digestive system after a meal, which also helps with the digestion and the nutrient absorption. So basically, as the blood passes by the capillary bed, the blood will flow through the capillary bed. And then we'll move on to venules. And here's just an image of one. And it says a venule is a very small blood vessel. It is in microcirculation, and that allows deoxygenated blood to return from the capillary beds to the larger blood vessels called veins. So the venules range from 8 to 100 micrometers in diameter, and they're formed when capillaries come together. So many venules unite to form a vein. So venule walls, as you can see here, have 3 layers. An endothelium layer, which is this part in the centre, which is composed of endothelial cells which act as a membrane. There's also a middle layer, which is made out of muscle and elastic tissue, and then there's an outer layer, which is here. And this outer layer has fibrous connective tissue onto it as well. And here we move on to veins. So the veins carry the deoxygenated blood towards the heart, and their structure is that they have thinner walled and larger lumen than the arteries, which allows them to hold larger volumes of blood, and they experience the least amount of pressure as they're the furthest away from the heart, so therefore there's not as much volume of blood coming through and there's less pressure. So the pulmonary vein carries the oxygenated blood from the lung back to the heart, and large veins have pocket-like valves to prevent backflow of the blood. And lastly here, we're just going to be talking about the structure of the blood vessels and the 3 layers of the tunics. So the tunica, we have the tunica intima here, the tunica media, and the tunica externa. So the tunica intima, which is this part here, is the innermost layer of the arteries and the veins, and the tunica intima is composed of a thin layer of endothelial cells and lines the entire circulatory system, from your heart to the large arteries all the way down to your tiny capillary beds. And then we see the next layer called the tunica media, and this is the muscular middle layer of the arteries and the veins. And you can see this here, which is the middle layer. And the tunica media of arteries contains more smooth muscle than the tunica media. This allows the arteries to constrict and dilate to adjust to the volume of blood that is needed. And so when the smooth muscle found within the tunica media is stimulated, it contracts and squeezes the walls of the arteries, and this narrows the vessel, and this also happens, and this creates the vasoconstriction, which is described as the narrowing of a blood vessel, which is due to the contraction of the muscular wall. So when an artery constricts, the blood flow decreases and the pressure within the vessels rise. And then you can also have vasodilation, which is the opposite of vasoconstriction, as it's the widening of the blood vessels due to the relaxation of the muscular wall. So when a blood vessel dilates, blood is able to flow through the vessel with less resistance. Therefore, vasodilation is the opposite effect to vasoconstriction. This concludes my end of my controlled assessment. Thank you very much for listening.